Trump and Putin at the end of the week had a pretty direct talk, and I think Trump heard an earful because these attacks last week by the Ukrainians were deeply destabilizing. They took place just at the moment of these negotiations. They were an attack on part of the Russian strategic triad, the nuclear triad, very dangerous, very destabilizing.
You know, what Jeffrey Sachs is pointing out here should make everyone pause. An attack on a nuclear triad component isn't just military strategy, it's an existential provocation. Whether people like Trump or not, hearing this kind of warning from Putin is no trivial matter. It speaks to how razor thin the margin for error has become in our global diplomacy. When negotiations are happening and someone throws a match into a powder keg like this, it's not just reckless. It's playing with fire on behalf of millions who have no say in it.
I don't think that any attack on the nuclear strategic assets of a nuclear superpower is a mere pinprick. I think that this whole war in Ukraine, the whole origins of the war, involve the nuclear threat, because the context of this whole war going back a quarter century is America's abandonment of the nuclear arms control framework. Probably one of the most decisive, but in a way under discussed uh, parts of the path to war was the U.S. unilateral abandonment of the anti ballistic missile treaty in 2002.
That was truly a turning point, and yet so few Americans even know about it. The ABM Treaty wasn't just another Cold War relic, it was a foundation of mutual restraint. Dismantling it signaled a dangerous shift in posture that Russia, quite understandably, interpreted as a threat to their survival.
And the reason why that's so important is that the United States destabilized the nuclear arms control framework, and Russia felt from that moment onward that there was the risk of decapitation strikes, the risk of a first strike nuclear attack against Russia, because the purpose of the anti ballistic missile treaty was to prevent such an occurrence. Then the United States unilaterally installed anti ballistic missile units, first in Poland, then in Romania. And I emphasize all of this because part of Russia's very deep, very legitimate, and very understandable concern about NATO enlargement was taking place in the context of the destabilization of the nuclear arms control framework. And the United States government refused to rule out also the placement of U.S. missile systems in Ukraine. And so the backdrop of all of this is that NATO enlargement was seen as a dire national security threat to Russia. We would feel exactly the same way with the installation of Russian or Chinese military bases near America's borders. This is a basic point that I cannot emphasize enough.
This is one of those moments where Sachs hits the nail on the head. If the roles were reversed, if China or Russia put missile systems near U.S. borders, we'd be furious. But somehow, when it's NATO, we expect other nations to stay calm. That's not how geopolitics works.
What Russia feels and we dismiss or ignore is exactly what Americans would feel, what President Trump would feel, for example, if there was any attempt whatsoever of Russia or China to place military installations near America's borders in the Western Hemisphere. There's no doubt about this. So all of this is to say that when there's an attack on strategic bombers, it's more than a pinprick from the point of view of the Russians. Okay. It is, and it was an attack thousands of miles in the interior.
Right.
And then what Russian leadership can see is the chortling of the Western press and the Western political leaders. Oh, look how clever this was. This isn't clever. This is absolutely reckless, is what it is.
It's alarming how cavalier some Western voices have become about actions that could trigger global conflict. This isn't a spy novel. It's real, and the consequences of miscalculation, especially involving nuclear assets, are irreversible.
It's very unlikely, maybe nearly impossible, that the CIA and MI6 were not engaged in all of this. Even if they were not engaged in it, it's almost certain that they knew about it. Uh, if they didn't know about it, it's unbelievably uh, damaging to the whole concept of the US and UK support for Ukraine's war effort that this could happen without the intelligence agencies knowing about it. Whether the President of the United States knew about it is yet another question, because the Russians have long said that the presidents are, sometimes just told after the fact, because it's the deep state that is at war with Russia.
That's a chilling thought, and yet increasingly echoed by global leaders. The idea that elected presidents aren't fully in control of intelligence or military operations is something Americans should take seriously. If true, it fundamentally changes the nature of accountability in foreign policy.
So that is a view that President Putin has expressed on many occasions. One in a famous interview he gave in Figaro in 2017, where he said he's dealt with many American presidents. They come into office with ideas, and then men in dark suits and briefcases come and explain to them how it really is. And yes, whether Trump knew beforehand or didn't know, none of it is exculpatory, because it doesn't answer any of the fundamental questions of
who's in charge of American intel. If this can happen and the leadership doesn't know it.
Well, first of all, President Trump is. So is he listening? Is he taking detailed briefs? That's number one. Second is, of course, the director of national intelligence and the director of the CIA. What are they telling the president of the United States? Third, what actually happened here? How can it be that the United States claimed not to know? And what does that say about this entire war effort? If it were true, it's terrifying because it says that Ukraine can use Western intelligence.
This gets to the heart of the unease many feel, whether you're pro-Ukraine or not. The thought that advanced military actions can be carried out without full visibility or control from leadership should concern everyone. It suggests we're drifting toward something deeply unstable.
Let me say one thing. I'm not against Congress overseeing, reviewing, commenting on foreign policy. I will say that Lindsey Graham has been the biggest failure of foreign policy in the United States Senate for decades. He's been wrong on every single issue. He has done a profound disservice to the American people and to our national security. So I find him ignorant. I find him utterly warmongering. I find him on the wrong side of just about every foreign policy issue of the last 25 years. So for me, the issue is not whether senators are involved. The issue is if they are wrong at every single instance. That is absolutely a direct threat to all of us. And what happened last week worsened your security. It worsened my security. It worsened the world's security. Zelensky is out of control. Zelensky is a cabal, a regime that is extraordinarily dangerous. It was installed by the United States in a coup in 2014. It is without constraint. It behaves in an extraordinarily provocative way. It has nothing to do with democracy. This is a small group ruling by martial law that is endangering the world. That's why it's the responsibility of the President of the United States to put an end to this kind of behavior. And as I've said, if the Ukrainian government doesn't want to agree, It is the responsibility of the President of the United States and the President of Russia to reach a security arrangement that is not destabilizing.
It's sobering to hear Sachs describe the Ukrainian regime not as a democracy, but as an unaccountable wartime cabal. Whether or not you agree, the point remains. If the U.S. has the power to end escalation and chooses not to, then the responsibility for future fallout lies squarely with our leaders.
Richard Blumenthal is the one who said, this is the best that money can buy. All of this fighting and killing and no Americans dying. This is using Ukraine to weaken Russia. And that means sacrificing Ukraine for this neocon idiocy of these two people. They've both been a disgrace in American foreign policy. And there was Lindsey Graham back in 2014 in the US-backed coup. He was involved in that. He was, of course, a big proponent of every war, the phony war, the real war, but on the phony pretext in Iraq, and all of the other adventures and escapades that have endangered American security, cost trillions of dollars, have been complete debacles. These two are just disgraceful in their substantive views. I don't mind senators having views. They should have views. These just happen to be people with completely wrong and despicable views.
You can disagree with political figures, but when a record of failure spans decades, wars, intelligence blunders, trillions lost, it's no longer just about bad judgment. It becomes a pattern of systemic harm. That's why scrutiny of foreign policy hawks isn't just warranted, it's necessary.
That are endangering you and me and the rest of the United States. That's the problem.
Tell me what British Prime Minister Starmer and German Chancellor Merz are up to. Is Merz inching towards World War III?
They are. I don't think that they're doing it intentionally, but they're complete warmongers. They're so much driven by their intelligence agencies, probably linked back to the CIA as the one that orchestrates MI6, BND, other security agencies. But the rhetoric and the behavior of these politicians is absolutely reckless. Merz comes in as Chancellor of Germany. You would think, not just think, you would hope, you would expect in a world that has some desire for self-preservation, that the Chancellor of Germany is newly arrived would at least have a call with President Putin to discuss the situation, to make an evaluation, to try to understand. But no.
This says it all, doesn't it? The lack of even a phone call, no attempt at dialogue, no gesture toward diplomacy. That tells you what kind of leadership we're dealing with: reactive, confrontational, and utterly blind to the stakes.
From the first moment that Merz came in, it has been expand the military, send Taurus missiles, strike deep inside Russia without even an iota of attempt at diplomacy. Starmer has been the same way. In other words, there's no attempt on the side of either of these two, who I think are basically factotums of their security states, and especially their intelligence agencies, to expand the war. So the absence of even a shred of evidence that they want to find a path to peace tells us what we need to know. They are warmongers from morning till night.
What Sachs just laid out is deeply troubling. We're watching leaders sleepwalk into escalation without even pretending to seek peace. It's not about being soft, it's about being smart. True leadership isn't measured by how loudly you beat the war drum, but by how wisely you steer your people away from disaster. Right now, that kind of wisdom feels dangerously absent.